Hi, everyone. So I'm going to give it like a minute or so until we kind of get on screen here. It takes about a minute to sync up with what's happening live. So I'm going to give it a quick second here and then we'll start welcoming people and I'll share a little bit about what's going on here. But thank you so much for joining us today and this evening. Okay, let me close that. But I am so excited to share with you a little bit about our school and our program here. My name is Miley Uehara, and I am the Chief of Enrollment Management here at the Silicon Valley International School. And can I just say that that is going to take me a hot minute to keep on remembering to say that? I have been with the school, formerly the International School of the Peninsula, oh gosh, for nearly 20 years. And I have two children, one that has graduated from the school and another that is currently in middle school. And so this school definitely is near and dear to my heart. So I am so excited to share our programs with you, our approach and philosophy towards education. I will welcome in a few minutes here or seconds Jacqueline Cody, who is our um, PYP or Primary Years Program Coordinator. So we'll dive into what all of those acronyms mean in a second here. But I did want to go over some housekeeping before we truly get started here to share with you a little bit. So this is a private live YouTube link here. So the only way that people are able to see what we're doing is through the link that we provided you and your family with. We are recording it because just in case some of our friends haven't been able to join us or it hasn't worked in their schedule, we will be able to provide this to them. What's really exciting about this format that we're sharing with you is that I figured people are kind of over Zoom. So we decided to try something different that wasn't Zoom and just kind of shake it up a little bit. You know, we're Silicon Valley International School. We want to be a little innovative here. So it's going to be kind of like a talk show format. On your right hand side, you'll see that you'll be able to leave comments or put down questions. And we will be seeing that as we're talking and sharing here. And we'll try to incorporate, answers into what we're saying. But also at the end of this, we will be able to go over some like a question and answer period. But as with everything else, please be mindful of the comments that are being shared. It is public. And during the live recording feedback, it will also be shared too. So without further ado, let me also welcome my guest speaker. I feel like I have my own talk show here. My guest speaker, which is Jacqueline Cody, and she will come on in about 2 seconds, I believe. Hello. And I'm
Hello.
gonna put us in smaller screens because we feel much more comfortable when it's not zoomed in our face like
Yeah,
this, and our face takes up the entire like space here. So
yes,
welcome, Jacqueline. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so excited to share with our parents, a little bit more about how uh,
mm,
we really help cultivate critical thinkers here at our school and the method in which we do that. So
great.
I'm excited to have you share that with them. But I would love if you could like share a little bit about yourself and your
Sure.
connection to the school and
Mhm.
how long you've been here.
Alrighty, will do. I apologize in advance as well. I've scratched my cornea, so my eye's a little angry looking, but I feel very happy to be here. So this is actually my 7th year at the school, and I'm a parent to the school as well. My daughter has just joined this year in the preschool program, so I'm kind of getting that perspective as well. I have a long history with the IB. I'm actually a product of an IB education myself. I grew up as the quintessential third culture kid, growing up with Canadian parents in an international school in Bangkok. That is a very well respected international school that has the three IB programs. And so I've gone through those and graduated from the diploma program, and then have kind of spent the majority of my career working in inquiry based learning environments. In addition to that, my mom has been an early childhood educator for her entire life and has been a school director for Reggio inspired early childhood centers for about 30 years now. So
Wow.
inquiry is really something that I feel like is in my blood. It was an unavoidable career path and one that I'm very happy I chose. And yeah, that's about it for me.
Well, I love that you've kind of given a little hint about what we're going to dive into, which is like inquiry. So that's coming up
Yeah.
soon there. But I would love it if you could kind of like, we're here to talk about,
Mhm,
our approach and philosophy of education. And that's really embedded in this thought of um, PYP, or that acronym
mhm,
PYP. So I'd
mhm.
love it if you could share with our families here an overview of what the PYP is.
Okay. So hopefully some of you have heard of the International Baccalaureate Organization. And it's a framework for education that was actually born in Geneva, Switzerland. Now, many people think of IB as the diploma program. It's most synonymous with those kind of last 2 years of high school, and that's kind of where a lot of its reputation was originally gained. And so there's kind of a neat story to the founding of IB that I don't feel many people know. But in Geneva, Switzerland in the 60s, there were a group of parents that got together and they were involved in higher education or involved in education. And there was kind of this shared concern that when students were being educated internationally and then returning to their home country or having a new posting, they weren't really able to anticipate what that child's learning experience had been like. There wasn't kind of a commonality when it comes to an international school education. And so talks began about what that could look like. And through multiple variations and lots of ideation, the IB diploma program was born. And like I said, that was born in the 60s, 1968. Following that, there was a lot of thought about, well, what does it mean for a child to be successful in the diploma program? How can we anticipate what that would look like? What kind of learner do we want to cultivate? And they then had the PYP program and the MYP program were created. So the PYP has been around since the 90s and it was rolled out all around the world in a lot of international schools. And then more recently in the United States, there has been kind of a resurgence, I guess, of interest around inquiry based learning. And there's been quite a number of independent schools and as well public schools as well who have adopted this curriculum. So, really, the goal, if we're going to kind of like lay it out, was to create this common curriculum framework for students approximately aged 3 to 12 because they wanted to create a continuity of learning in the IB program and really create this sense of international mindedness amongst the learners.
And what I love about this is that it also allows that you can be authentic
Mhm,
to the learning that needs to place in a particular country, right, or
mhm,
state, but you can
mhm.
have this framework and approach towards
Oh, yeah.
education that really cultivates how a student gains knowledge
Mhm.
and how they question knowledge and learn things. And you referred to a few acronyms there. So,
Yeah.
just for our parents, like PYP stands for Primary Years Program, and that's going to
Mhm.
be for our students that are in preschool all the way until fifth grade. And then
Yes.
beginning in sixth grade, so like middle school, you have something called the Middle Years Program.
Mhm.
And that actually, very interestingly enough, goes all the way till 10th grade. It doesn't stop
Yeah.
at eighth grade, which is like where our middle school in America kind of stops. And then what everybody kind of knows or has kind of a familiarity to, or I would say a lot of families, is going to be that diploma program. And the
Mhm.
diploma program is going to be years 11 and 12. And so, it's like when I first got introduced to IB, International Baccalaureate, like, and you read the materials, like there's all these acronyms. Like, I
Yeah.
felt like I was a consultant again, because when I first went into consultancy, it was like all of these acronyms, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like, what do they all stand for?"
Oh, yeah.
Um, so, going back to a little bit of what you said,
Mhm.
inquiry and
Mhm.
concept-based learning, I would love if you could dive into a little bit more about that. Like, what
Yeah.
exactly is that? Because it's kind
Yeah.
of I feel like a buzzword in education,
Mhm.
or you hear some schools will say experiential learning and all of that. But
Yeah.
I would love it if you could dive a little bit more into like what inquiry and concept-based learning
Mhm.
is, and especially like at our school too.
Sure. So, yes, inquiry and concept based learning are integral to the IB diploma program and to the MYP and to the PYP. So, specifically in the context of the PYP, Miley, you said a really great point, which is that the IB does not dictate what we teach. It doesn't provide a curriculum and say, all right, schools all around the world teach the same curriculum. They actually frown upon that. They really want to make sure that the host country, the cultures of the school are represented in the curriculum, and it's rather guidance on the approach in terms of what we prioritize and how we deliver and teach. So, kind of two of the main areas that we have considerable training on and spend a lot of time developing are inquiry and concept based learning. And so, inquiry at the root to really simplify things, is this idea that both parties, educators and learners, come to the table with something to add to the conversation. In the education world, we call it co-constructing knowledge. It's this idea that whenever we're diving deep into something, we want to make sure that we provide ample time and opportunity for students to share their interest, to share their prior knowledge, to share the questions that they may have. And we look at it like teachers come to the table with an incredible amount of wealth, expertise, experience, and knowledge. And so do our students. They come to the classroom with a incredible amount of experience, a wealth of knowledge, expertise, ideas in just the same manner. And we want them to feel as though they can partner with us and that they have a sense of ownership over their learning, that the learning matters and it means something to them. Um, and really, at the heart of all of this is this idea that we want our students to have the language to share their thinking, that's critical.
Right. Well, and I think we've shared like some thoughts about how what I love about it and the way I've described it to parents is
Mhm.
that your child will have a voice, right? You know,
Yeah.
they come to class as young as 3, 4, even 5 years old. And
Yeah.
when posed like with a question, they have something to say and there is
Mhm.
value in that their perspective because what they know and the way they see the world at their even at their age
Mhm.
has been developed by their experience that they've had at home with their
Mhm.
parents, where they've gone to, and so it's really giving value to that voice that they have coming into the classroom.
Yeah. And those are skills that we explicitly teach. We explicitly teach questioning skills. We explicitly teach how to investigate an area that, like research skills that you're interested in. We
Right.
explicitly teach communication skills. So it's not something that we just kind of passively expect to happen. Yes, of course, our teachers model it, but they also explicitly teach how to develop those skills and at what age that skill teaching might look like. Of course, it differs, but there's an explicit teaching from our 3-year-olds all the way up so that they're each able to evidence that type of thinking. That's critical to what we're doing.
I think what I love is, in the preschool age, a common thing that you'll always hear the students walk around and say is, "I wonder."
Yes. Yeah.
I wonder. And what's amazing about our school is actually it's done in a bilingual environment,
Mhm.
and so it's
Mhm.
done, through French as well as English or Chinese,
Yeah.
and German too now because we're also
Mhm.
going to have German at our school. Now,
Yeah.
why would this approach towards learning or education? Why would parents want this for their children?
Yeah, I'm gonna come to that in a quick second. I just wanna make sure I
Okay.
also explain what concept-based learning is, because I think that's one of the ones that's
Yes.
probably not such a familiar term. So concept-based learning is this idea that if we really, look back, if we, like, zoom out and we look big picture, there's always, this big ticket item, this conceptual idea that's at the heart of what we're teaching. And so in an IB school, what we do is as a team of educators, so our German teachers, our French, our English, and our Chinese teachers all together will think, how is what we're teaching connected?
Mhm.
What's the big thing that binds us together? What is a shared part of our curriculum? And we're able to use those concepts to make sure that our students have this understanding of how their learning is connected across disciplines, across language programs, from the confines of the classroom to the outside world, across the grade levels as they move through our school. So, for example, we might be looking at Native American studies in the English program, and we might be looking at Indigenous Taiwanese groups in the Chinese program as an example. Or maybe in the French program, we're actually looking at something that seems totally unrelated, like air. We are really creative in thinking, what are these about? Like, what is the essence of why we're teaching it? And we were able to identify that really at the root of this was we wanted students to understand the concept of structure, social structures, physical structures, and like the properties of air and Native American dwellings and how they were physically constructed, contingent upon the land that they live on. How to become proficient in math. We have to have an understanding of how numbers are structured and place value, and that we're doing a huge amount of grammar instruction in third grade. That's all about this idea of structures. So we have those really deep conversations as educators about, okay, that's at the essence of what we're doing. Why are we teaching this to kids? Is because we think it's fundamental for them to understand the structure of language, math, social studies, like the chronology of history and putting on a timeline. And then because we're having these deep conversations, we're able to help establish those connections with our learners by letting them know this is why we're learning these things. It's because this is all connected and that structure doesn't have one form. But if we can intimately understand structure in all these different contexts, we think that that's going to mean they're going to have a much deeper, more robust understanding of the content and that it doesn't feel isolated. Sorry, that was a little bit long, but I hope that illustrates
No,
the point.
but I also think that, one of the things that I commonly say to our families is, and especially when they first are going through the inquiry process at our school,
Mhm.
is to not think of us as a language school. Because
Mm.
oftentimes, like families will, like they might do a Google search for like bilingual schools or, French
Mhm.
schools or, Chinese schools and things like that. And we pop up. But the first thing I say is don't think of us as a language school
Mhm.
because we are so much more than that. And really, it is about providing we have high standards in terms of academics, high
Absolutely.
academics for our students, but it's also this understanding of being able to make connections at a
Mhm.
much deeper level and
Yeah.
that and at a young age also, but that it's thinking like in terms of like nowadays, like our children are growing up in a world where they can ask Siri or Alexa
Yes.
anything, right? And so
Absolutely.
really what's the big thing that we want them to do is to build connections across things, exactly to what you
Yeah.
said, that the structure of numbers or an algebraic
Mm.
equation has
Mhm.
similarities or crossovers to a bridge,
Yeah. Yes.
and what is that, right? And to
Mhm.
build that connection there.
Mhm. And we do feel the bilingual component certainly gives us the advantage in that it naturally has our students thinking from multiple perspectives about the same concept. That it gives us the opportunity to have two educators really kind of like pushing and challenging the students to think about this concept with a different linguistic and a different cultural lens so that
Yeah.
they're expanding their understanding in a even deeper way that's bound by culture and language in a like really meaningful and neat way.
Would you say that when they learn through this methodology that it
Mhm.
also cultivates critical thinkers, which is what this talk
Oh
is
yeah.
about, but also it empowers them?
Mm,
Don't you feel like as students they feel one agency, but it's also empowerment too?
absolutely, yes. And we will be talking about like a really great example of how we see our students as empowered learners later on this evening. But at the root of what we're doing, we want our children to see themselves as lifelong learners. For that's critical. If you don't see learning as something that you value and that you love and that gives you something and makes you feel excited, then we don't really feel as though we've done a great job. That's a goal of ours. And in order to create empowered learners, we have to make sure that they have a voice. So yes, we have a written curriculum, and yes, it's robust, and there are skills and competencies that we feel must be taught at each grade level, and we're sure to cover them. But within that area, there are meaningful ways to include student voice. For example, our kindergarteners had this really great unit all about communities. And there are some typical things that we want our kindergarteners to understand. There are some language competencies, some math competencies. It's like a lovely introduction to social studies, geography of like where we live, kind of comparing ourselves, maybe like our school context to other context, etc. But there's a flexibility. So our teachers have their curriculum planned out. And for this particular unit, there's a whole bunch about community helpers, and there's a whole bunch about kind of social emotional development and how we express our feelings and our needs and how we communicate to resolve conflicts and keep our community harmonious. But there's also room for meaningful introduction. So one year, a bunch of kindergarteners somehow became fascinated with bee colonies
Oh.
and brought forward to the teacher that bees in themselves were a community and that there was a style of communication that happens amongst bees. And they wanted to learn more about how this system, this community of bees functions. And the teacher absolutely took a pause and said, that is a really worthwhile inquiry that's going to help them better understand that community and communication is not unique to the human species and that it may look different, but the fact that the children can suggest an idea that's relevant and the teacher can respond to that idea by saying that's beautifully connected, let's investigate and see what connections we can establish, is the beauty of the approach.
Right. And I think it was also under communities, was that where they also, interviewed people in our school community? So, like, the security guard and,
Yeah.
like, the, receptionist or, the teacher's aide to find out what their roles were, and it was really cute because I
Mhm.
think the year that I'm remembering, they interviewed, our guard, and they were like, "Do you drive a police car?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "I drive a silver car."
Exactly.
But what's also nice about that was, sometimes I'll get questions about, well, how is, early like math literacy interwoven
Mm,
into that? And this one particular year was that they actually even tied in very age appropriate kind of pre-coding skills. And
yeah.
so they had designed a city or like a map.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so each of the students thought about like what do they want to be in their community when they grow up, after spending
Yeah.
time learning about different roles. And so it was like the postman, the farmer, the
Yeah.
fireman, the doctor. And so then they made, like the buildings that these people would be in and they put it
Yeah.
on the map and then they got their little bee bot and like
Mhm.
figured out how like, "Oh, there's a fire here in the city. How do
Yeah.
we move the fire truck from here
Exactly.
to there?" And then so they actually had to think in terms of
Mhm.
like, "Well, I go 1 block right, I turn another block left." And so it was
Mhm.
interesting how they incorporate all of that and like for the children, it was just all
Mhm.
about their community, right? And who
Yeah.
they could be in their community.
Yep. That's a great example.
So how would you say, how do we create these units,
Mm. Mhm.
for our students to experience? Like how is
Mhm.
it that we develop these things?
Yeah, thank you. So I myself actually meet with all of our teaching teams, and our teaching teams are all of our language teachers together in a room thinking about what we feel are essential skills and content. So, what we know is essential for each grade level. And then, like I kind of explained earlier, this idea of identifying the concept that is shared, and then really kind of spending time making sure that we understand one another's perspectives. I think that's a real beauty of our French teachers get to hear from our Chinese program teachers, and our Chinese program teachers get to hear from our English program teachers, and we'll be getting to hear from our German program teachers soon enough. And so, there's definitely been some debates and some kind of deep dialogue, but really rich and meaningful of like, well, why are you teaching that? And why does that feel essential to you? Or I see how you're doing division in French, and that's very different than how I'm doing division in English. So, can you explain to me why that's your approach and how you think that kind of opens students' minds up, or why you think that's maybe a preferred approach? And so it's a very collaborative process. It's a very unified process, but our language programs for very intentional reasons will have differences. They'll have differences to reflect language, to reflect cultural competencies that we feel are really, really important to kind of establish in each language program. So everyone has a wonderful sense of what others are doing and a sense of why they're doing that.
Mm.
But the kids will notice that. And so they'll be like, oh, well, in English, we're kind of learning these things, but in Chinese, we're learning these things. And what's neat is that our teachers have something called harmonization, where they're together and they're co-teaching the kids. And often in harmonization, they'll kind of bring that to the forefront and say, we've been investigating this in English and we've been investigating this in French. How do you see these as connected? Or why do you think we've approached it in this manner? And kind of work with the students to make sure that they are aware of those connections and can see the reason that we do that. And of course, we do this bilingually.
You know what I love about that is that as they get educated in this type of philosophy approach towards
Mhm.
education, grade over grade, year after year, I mean,
Mm.
ultimately, what I see happening is that these students will understand that they can be change makers in the future, right? Because
Mhm.
they'll have a deeper understanding of the world and these concepts and how they're connected in a way that I
Mhm.
think even for myself, based on my education and how I was raised and taught, they'll have a deeper understanding. So,
Yeah.
uh, I don't know if we've talked about yet, like, the different types of transdisciplinary themes and all these,
Yes.
again, fancy IB
Ah,
words.
yep.
But basically, there's set quote unquote umbrella themes that
Mhm.
will happen each year for our students. And I'm wondering if you could dive in a little bit deeper about how this is structured
Okay.
and how students can continue learning about sharing
Mhm.
the planet year after year
Mhm.
without learning the same thing over and over. So,
Yes. Yes. So I think it's important to first recognize that prior even to becoming an IB school, we've always had a spiraling curriculum. We believe that a spiraling curriculum kind of best meets the needs of learners, and we believe that students should see connection with their learning from year to year, and that we want to build a foundation and have them grow and learn in a kind of sequential manner and in a way that builds more content and skills into that kind of foundation. So that was always something that we have done. But you're right, there are lots of terms, and transdisciplinary is really just this idea that in the PYP we do not always learn in discrete disciplines. So yes, rest assured that math is often taught as math, and same for language. Like there are certain things that just don't make sense. Like there are certain grammatical concepts and there's certain mathematical operations that you really just need to make sure they know how to do it. And so you will have the experience of sometimes seeing a more traditional math or a more traditional language based assignment. But at the same token, there's a lot of math and language that are interwoven with science, with social studies, with design, with computer science, with art, with music, with PE, etc. And these are our units of inquiry. And so in each year for first through fifth grade, there are 6 units of inquiry that are approximately 6 weeks each. And in our
Mhm.
early years program, there are 4 units of inquiry that are approximately 9 weeks each. And these units have like a big idea that binds them together, and they have identified key concepts and identified content and skills that will be taught in that unit. So, sharing the planet is a great example. That's something that I can kind of give you an overview of what it might look like in preschool and then what it looks like in fifth grade.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in our preschool, their big idea is that living things grow and change in different ways. And we think this is a lovely early years unit where we kind of introduce plant sciences. At
Mhm.
this age, students really learn best when it's concrete and tangible. And so they can physically plant and grow. They can also track their own height over the year, as an example, or look at a photo journal of their own growth as a child. They can develop a lot of social emotional skills like caring for living things and why it's important to be an environmental steward, caring for pets at home, etc. And then, of course, it's the early years, so we bring in a lot of beautiful art exploration using nature as an inspiration to kind of get them excited about living things and developing that kind of respect. And then in math, we might have them developing their understanding of whole numbers and like counting objects in a set or building estimation skills, etc. And then kindergarten, sharing the planet starts to evolve a little bit into this exploration into the idea that soil is essential for life. And so in this, we
Mm.
build a lot about what it means to understand geology and what the earth is composed of, and different rock types and earth sciences. It kind of takes a new evolution each year. So one year, the students ended up really excited to learn about volcanoes and volcanic ash and volcanic rocks. And so they kind of spent a little bit more time there. One year, a group of students became interested in gemstones and really wanted to understand what made a stone considered precious
Mm.
and kind of like where the value came from. And they ended up being really interested in kind of like what that meant and where it came from, which was super cool. And one year, kids got really interested in decomposition. So we like brought microscopes into the classroom, and they were observing fruit decompose and kind of trying to like understand what that meant. And so there's all sorts of neat science with that. And then, of course, loads of vocabulary development, which is perfect for like phonics of trying to spell out those big words that are related to geology, and teaching spelling patterns and phonemic awareness and such. Um,
Well, I think that's interesting when you say that because, a common question that I'll get, from so many of our parents, regardless of program, is like, what is the vocabulary, or
yeah.
specifically for our Chinese
Mhm,
families interested in the Chinese program,
mhm,
like what characters are they learning?
mm,
And that's where we often say that it's so non-traditional in the sense of what parents typically think,
mhm,
because it's so
yeah.
embedded in the units and what the students are learning, that they could be introduced to vocabulary that a normal
Mhm,
type of school or program you wouldn't
mhm.
be, but because it's so integral to that unit that they're doing. So in
Yes.
terms of your gemstones, like I don't know, amethyst, right? I don't know,
Yes.
like, what it is in the
Yeah.
various languages, but they might all of a sudden spend weeks talking about amethyst, right?
Mhm.
And so that is
Mhm.
going to be a vocabulary word that they know, but yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And with Chinese, it's like I remember the class that got really interested in the volcanoes. It was a Chinese program class, but like I remember because I was even asking the teacher, and the teacher explained to me. She's like, "Well, the word for volcano in Chinese, it's the character for mountain and the character for fire. So it's actually really perfect
Mm,
linguistic exploration to like explain to the children that the root character of mountain, when added with other characters, can evolve and change." So she had a really beautiful way of dealing with kind of perhaps some of the characters that she maybe wouldn't have introduced in
introduce.
kindergarten had it not naturally evolved. And it became a really neat kind of linguistic exploration there.
So how would this, like, change and evolve going into, like, 3rd grade or even,
Mhm.
like, 5th grade?
Yeah, great. So, in second grade, I'll go to second grade, then fourth grade, because second
Okay.
grade has a cool take on it too. So, second grade has a unit that's all about how humans use, grow, and dispose of resources and materials and its impact on the natural environment. And so, from the geographical perspective, they do a lot about culture and geography in this unit and looking at food around the world, not just what grows, but what people typically have access to.
Mm,
They do a little bit around like equity and equality, and they start to look at whether things are equitably distributed or not, and kind of they use photograph essays to kind of get the students thinking about these things. One year, they ended up doing a really cool project about mapping food deserts in the United States, about
mm.
how there might be this notion that everybody has equal access to food in the United States, but they ended up asking some really thought-provoking questions and kind of mapping out areas in the US where that are called actually food deserts. And the students got really kind of motivated to understand why these existed and what they could do about them and how they could take action. And so in this unit, you often see a lot of that coming out. This second grade unit tends to be the ones where the teachers are combining it with like persuasive letter writing or like advertising, so that they're giving the students the tools for, if you find something you feel very passionate about, how might you communicate that to others, or how might you inspire others to share your perspective, or at least to listen to your perspective. So that's a cool one. And then of course there's water cycle and conservation, etc. In fourth grade, this is when they start to look at how living things adapt in order to survive in a
Mm.
and this one's kind of cool because they pull in some really neat history into this unit of looking at the foundation of national parks and kind of where these conservation efforts originated and how they were founded and their preservation. They kind of look historically about what preceded something to be considered a national park. Like, was there an event that led to that? And then they do a load with math in terms of like predictions and data handling and measurement. And sometimes they do like a to scale drawing of the national park and kind of mapping out where, um, like how the land is used and such. And then finally, PYP,
Oh,
PYP
wait,
exhibition.
before you get
Right.
to
Oh,
that, my favorite thing about the 4th grade run, well, this
yeah.
one year when it was done, was the provocation question to
Mhm,
kick off
mhm.
the unit. So one of the teachers, what she did was she had roped off or, like, taped off an area in her room, and then on the floor, she put, like, pretzels or, like,
Yes.
I think M&Ms and, I forget what other types of, maybe it was chocolate candy, I don't know, something on the ground.
I think it was
Um
Fruit Loops, maybe.
was
I
it Fruit Loops? Maybe.
think
And
so,
then the
yeah.
students came back from recess. So she did this during recess, and when they came back,
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh my god, there's candy on the floor." And she's like, "Okay, first of all, do not eat it because
Yeah.
it's on the floor, you can't."
Yeah.
But then she had them choose without telling them what they were
Mhm.
doing to choose different implements. And
Mhm.
one was, like, little pinchers,
Yeah.
it wasn't chopsticks, it was little pinchers. One was
Mhm.
a spoon, and, I don't know what the other one was. Maybe it was more like to kinda stab something or something. And she's like,
Yeah.
"Okay, you guys have 1 minute to grab as much as you want, from the floor." And so they all went to their area and they kept grabbing it. And as they were doing the exercise, she was repeating what she was hearing them say, like, "Oh my gosh, this is too hard. I can't scoop it," or "I
Yep.
can't grab it." And so she was repeating everything that they were saying. So when they were done, she said, "Who what was easy for you to get?" Or,
Mhm.
or, "What difficulty did you have?" And eventually what she was guiding them towards was understanding that, like, the pinchers were able to pick up things like the the M&Ms or something like that, or, they had an easier
Yeah.
time with that, whereas other things could be scooped with the spoon. And it was such a cool thing because then it tied into food sources and how animals have adapted to their
Yes, adaptation.
environment,
Mhm,
like because they have beaks. So, what type of
mhm.
food are they then sourcing where they live? And so, it
Yeah.
was just a cool way to give them a very small and easy experiential experience in the
Mhm.
classroom, and then, she
Yeah.
told them they couldn't eat the candy, but I think she gave them, like, something on the side afterwards because obviously it's on the food.
Yeah,
It
of
was
course.
really cool to me. I was, like, helping students understand that connection in that
Yeah.
way rather than just reading it was, I
Mhm.
think, great.
Yeah, and that's an awesome example too, because that's something we haven't really talked about this evening is kind of how these units get started. And that example you shared is a very illustrative one because we start with provocations where we know that we're going to talk about adaptation. We know that we want students to understand food chains and food webs and that we're going to dive into national parks, etc. But rather than saying, all right, children, today we're going to be learning about adaptation, instead we do something that really gets them immersed and it is experiential and gets them excited and really thinking about bird beaks and how they're suited to the type of food that is available to them and how they've adapted as a species. And then, through that natural dialogue, we start to get them wondering, why do you think we're doing this today? What could it be related to? We start showing them images of birds with different beaks and we start having them match the bird beaks with the food source. And then we talk about the concept of adaptation. So
Right.
thank you for sharing that. That's a really good
I
example.
I love it how the teachers won't tell them almost for, like, a week sometimes what unit
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
doing, and so you
Mhm,
have these students really trying to wonder, and
mhm.
they're going up to the big wall where it shows, like, all their different units, and they're trying to figure out which one they're doing, and
Yeah,
really getting them to want to know what they're
yeah,
learning about, to kind of build those connections.
yeah.
But you were gonna, talk about PYPX. I'm so sorry I interrupted you there.
No, that's okay. But, like, based on what you just said too, that's the beauty of the inquiry approach is that we want them to develop those thinking skills. We don't want them to be able to go and ask Siri or ask Alexa or ask whomever, "What's this unit about?" We want them to be able to use their thinking to problem solve and make sense of what we're doing, why it matters, and what it's connected to. So we intentionally design things that leave a little bit of mystery so that we develop that thought process and we guide them on that. And then in fifth grade, this unit is a really special one, and it is one of the most kind of well known parts of a primary years program. And it's something that I feel really kind of does a great job of illustrating the benefits of a PYP education. And it's something called PYP exhibition. And so this happens towards the end of fifth grade, and it's under the umbrella theme of sharing the planet, where each year we come up with a big idea that we want the students to develop a in-depth large-scale research project, and it is student-led and teacher and mentor supported, but students have to identify an area of personal significance, and that can be really tough for a fifth grader. And so there's a whole lot of work that we do to kind of provoke their thinking, to inspire them, and to guide them so that they're able to select something that they care enough about that they can spend about 7 weeks researching and becoming a relative expert in. And then we hold a really special event that we call PYP Exhibition, where we invite sister schools, we invite family members, members of the community to come in and to kind of engage in this in depth dialogue with our fifth graders about how this project has transformed their thinking, how their thinking has shifted, how it's deepened their understanding. Um, did they have any sort of preconceived ideas that they've perhaps had a switch on? And so it's a really powerful project. It's something that I think is really unique about PYP in that, sorry, about the IB, is that at the end of each program, there is this sort of large scale project that one might typically associate with an older grade, but we believe that our children are absolutely able to do so. So in PYP, it's exhibition. In the middle years program, we have a personal project. And then in the diploma program, the students write an extended essay, which is it's really similar to a thesis
Yeah.
style, yeah, writing. And so this is something that Sharing the Planet helps kind of like bring it all together. After all these years of all the things they've been thinking about with Sharing the Planet, has something clicked or ticked in their mind that has gotten them really upset or gotten them really impassioned or gotten them really excited or inspired. And what are they going to do about that? What are you going to do? How are you going to become an expert? And how is this going to change you as a person?
So what are some I mean, you've shared with me some great examples, but I would
Yeah,
love it if you could share it with our families here, some of like your
sure.
favorite ones that we've seen more recently.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, all of them are my favorite because they're all very close to the students. But a few that kind of stand out in a neat way, or our one year, one of our students, he really became interested in, I think probably maybe from second grade, the how humans grow, use, and dispose of natural materials. He started really thinking about how our livestock industry, our pig slaughterhouses, namely, he became fascinated with how animals were reared for meat consumption. And he wanted to have a sort of transformational experience for his visitors. And he had a real love for math. And so what he did was he built a two scale pig pen, basically, that he had the visitors, our community members, our family members, etc., actually enter the space. And he also has a real love for technology and he loved computer science. And so he kind of like, I don't really know how he did it, to be perfectly honest. But he recorded himself so that when you went into the room, it played. And he walked you through and had sound effects and everything about what it would be like to be a pig in this pig pen. And it was powerful and really, really beautiful. Another example, a girl one year, she was really interested in ocean pollution and namely plastics in the ocean and wanting to understand kind of like what solutions that we currently have. she,
Was it
she felt a
wasn't
little
that
bit
tied to like in second grade, she also learned
yeah,
about the like
microplastic.
yeah, the
Yeah.
microplastics, yeah.
Mhm. Exactly. So she decided that she wanted to spend the next 7 weeks kind of really diving deep into ocean pollution, specifically looking at plastics and kind of organizations and agencies that are working to kind of support this. And she did a few neat things where she kind of inspired a lot of her classmates and they went together and they did a big beach cleanup. And there was actually a huge turnout for that, which was really amazing. And when they were there, they collected a whole bunch of plastic off the beach. And then because this particular student has a love for the arts, she really thought about what to do with this plastic now that she's collected it. And she created this beautiful art installation that was kind of like a mobile. And so you would walk through it. It was like walking through a sea of plastic. And she felt it was really immersive and illustrative of what it's like to be a sea creature in the ocean when you're
Oh,
swimming
with
through plastic.
plastics.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And it was just like beautiful and profound and memorable. And she still, they both those students still talk about it today. And then my final example, which I also was so excited about, was two students who weren't necessarily always the most engaged learners. You kind of had to do a little coaxing to get them to be serious and to take things seriously. And so we didn't really know how it would go because you never really know. And we were just so hopeful that these two individuals would choose something that they really cared about and that they would want to spend time researching and would have the autonomy to do so and the maturity to do so. And separately from one another, they both ended up becoming really fascinated with like carbons and the environment and like environmental footprints and things like that.
Mm.
And somewhere around like I think it was about week 5, we kept pairing students to kind of bounce ideas off of one another. And we purposely paired them because they had very similar interests. And they decided that they wanted to collaborate together and asked us if they could collaborate for the final day. And it was all of the teachers say it was the most motivated and excited we have ever seen them. They made like personalized t-shirts to come run the day and were so serious and they dressed up. They like wore buttoned up little shirts and they were just so they were so serious about what they're doing. Like there were no jokes. Jokes were aside and they wanted to educate you on what they had learned. And it was just such a beautiful partnership and coming together of two students. And we're all so proud of them because it was just like a real pivotal moment in their learning. And I think it was the most excited they had been in a while. And we shared that excitement.
Well, I think what's so interesting about these 3 examples that you gave is that each one took a different turn. It was all under the same, like, sharing the planet,
Yeah.
right? But then it also allowed each of them to tap into really, like, what their interests or
Yep.
I don't like to use the terminology like passions when they're so
Mm,
young, just because they're young yet, and
yeah.
we have a lifetime to develop
Yeah.
so many passions, but really, like, what drives them or what they really
Mhm.
want to learn about, what
Absolutely.
really they want to be engaged in, and allows them that quote unquote agency
Mhm.
to do so. And I think
Mhm.
that's just such a wonderful thing that we can give to them. And again, going back to what I said earlier, that we're teaching them about connections over time, right? It's
Yeah.
not just about, one unit or
Mhm.
things like that, but really we want them to start to understand that greater concept and build
Mhm.
connections and how everything's built together. And so that's oh,
Yeah.
I always get so excited, especially when we start diving into like the PYPX and all of that.
Yeah.
So, I don't see anybody asking questions, but we do have some people. And so, like, if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to pop them in
Yes.
to the chat here. We'll wait a few minutes to see if anybody has anything. But really, I mean, that is there anything else, last minute that you'd like to share, with our families that just really excites you when it comes to PYP or this approach towards education? And I mean, you and I have spent probably hours talking about this, and we could
Yeah.
probably dive into it
Absolutely.
forever, but you know.
I could talk about this all day. I mean, I think for me, I have a real personal and professional connection with this kind of framework for education because obviously in my personal life, I have found it to be advantageous, and I think it's really helped me be successful in my path and allow me to be the person I am. And of course, I've chosen it for my own child, and you've chosen it for your children. So I think that kind of says a lot for itself. But I think the real power is that we are committed to ensuring that our learners see themselves as lifelong learners, are excited about learning, and that learning matters, and that they have a voice. And I think that kind of really just sums it up. It's something that sometimes goes unsaid or unnoticed, and that these things aren't things that will happen passively. You can't just wait and hope for them. You've got to create an environment and a system that cultivates and encourages and promotes and empowers these skills and these tendencies and these ideas. And
Right.
that's where that's why the IB diploma program is such a well recognized and well respected program, is because there's the reputation that IB diploma graduates are going to be successful, that they are articulate and well spoken, that they have the interpersonal skills necessary to be successful. They have the thinking skills necessary. And that's not by chance, right? That's really because there was an intentionality in the design of the program
How they
to
learn.
cultivate
Yeah.
that kind of learner. And that's shared. The IB learner profile, which we didn't get in today, but it's this idea of what kind of learner do we want to develop as a school, and that's shared across all IB schools, and it's shared across all of the IB programs as well.
Well, and I think what's easily lost in even, as you and I talk about it, is that really this is done in a bilingual environment. When
Oh
they're preschool and pre-K, it's 80% or more
yeah.
in the target language, Chinese, French, or German. And
Mhm.
then beginning in kindergarten, first and second, it's about 70% in that
Yeah.
target language. And then in upper elementary school, you're talking about still
Mhm.
60%, right? In
Yeah,
that
that's
target
right.
language. And I think it's so easily lost that in all of these examples that we gave, that it truly is in a bilingual and biliterate environment to where we
Mhm.
have high expectations
Mhm.
on not only their thinking process and their
Yeah.
approach, but it's also in terms of their literacy across both languages, their understanding, their vocabulary, and all of that
Mhm.
too. So yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we have something. Why may I ask why your school decided to add language learning on top of the IB learning for students? And how do we balance language learning and other subjects of learning? This is such a wonderful question.
Yes.
So I think, in terms of why the school decided to add language, it's interesting because our roots as a school, a quick history of our school was we were started in 1979 as a Peninsula French American school. In 1996 is when we added the Chinese immersion program to our school. We are the third oldest Chinese immersion program across the United States, actually. So our roots really were in
Mhm.
bilingual education.
Yeah.
I've been with the school long enough to kind of see what we were like prior to adopting this philosophy of international baccalaureate or IB approach. The roots of who we always were, and what, kind of to what Jacqueline was saying, was that we always had this perspective that we
Mhm.
want our students to be active, and engaged in their learning, and especially in the younger years, it's about discovery. It's about being
Mhm.
messy with their hands. It's about experience and everything.
Yeah.
And I would have to say that for many, many years before we even formally investigated International
Oh, yeah.
Baccalaureate, it was a discussion of why
Mhm.
don't we? And it was a
Mhm.
way that we could really bring together our two language programs. And we were so excited by our merger with Alto International School.
Mhm.
We will collectively be Silicon Valley International School, but we are so excited by that because they have the same philosophy and approach and deep rooted belief
Yeah.
in this approach towards education, and this is how and why students should learn. But,
Yeah.
I'll let you dive a little bit more into that because
Okay.
you're also the one that's working with the teachers and
Yeah.
developing this, curricula too.
So, I mean, if we were to look in the reverse and we would say, why would we add? It's because we believe that bilingualism is a beautiful complement to the framework, and that in teaching children to critically think and to think from multiple perspectives and to have a deep understanding, doing so bilingually naturally encourages that thinking from multiple perspectives, ensuring a real deepening, making sure that we've beautifully identified concepts. Sometimes, if you're a monolingual teacher, you're alone with the kids all day, you're not necessarily as explicit in identifying those connections and ensuring that you really are teaching conceptually. And so when we partner with bilingual IB schools around the world and speak with them, we kind of share this vision that it actually keeps us on our toes. It makes us true to the IB because of being bilingual. I don't want to use the word forces, but it encourages us continue having those conversations across language programs. And for the question about how we balance language learning and other subject learning, so we learn all of our subjects through the language. And so our students are learning computer science and they're learning design and they're learning drama and they're doing PE and they're doing science and social studies all through the languages. And so it's not that we have our traditional subjects and then we take a pause and we have Chinese class or we have French class. That's not the approach of our school. It's rather that language is the way in which we open our eyes to our curriculum. It's the way in which we understand our curriculum when we dive into our curriculum.
Right, right.
I hope that
Well,
answers that.
and one of the in terms of like balance of language and subject, my go-to all the time, and if
Mhm.
you've ever had conversations with me in previous families, um, it's always the fourth grade unit of migration because for me it
Mhm.
just beautifully illustrates how language and subject matters really intersect. And without diving too deep into it, we learn a little bit about the California gold rush because that is like California history is just something that
Yeah.
we all have to learn living in California. But tied into that also, and how why they migrated here, why what was here that we had in California, why is gold so important and all of that. But then also very standard to elementary school education is learning about like the solar system. So
Yeah.
they do
Mhm.
a
It's a good example.
research project on the planets and the solar
Mhm.
system. And the year my son did it, it was all about like you choose a planet and you do your research in it. You do a presentation on that planet, on facts about the planet. But then the teacher poses the question of like, well, if we ever had to move to a planet, is it because we're exploring similar to like the California gold rush? Is something there that we need? Or is it that we're fleeing Earth because similarly, they also talked about refugee camps and refugees and
Mhm.
war, but something happened on Earth. But all of that um, solar system content that they had to research and all of that, it was actually done in the target language. So it's done
Yeah.
in French or it's
Mhm.
done in Chinese in particular for our school. And so that is what's so neat about it, is that it can intertwine
Mhm.
together. I see we have another question about how the improvements or evolving of this teaching method happens. So I
Yeah.
would assume that means, in terms of like moving towards inquiry based and like how the teachers go through that process. I'm thinking, is that what that question is?
I can answer those ones. I can answer her first one as well about student engagement,
Okay,
how
okay.
student engagement of inquiry-based learning is evaluated, because that's a really interesting question is, we talk a lot about this actually, and, I went to this really beautiful training about inquiry-based, feedback and assessment, and the trainer said something that really stuck with me and what he said was, "What we evaluate shows what we value." And I think that for me it stuck with me because it was
Mm.
pivotal in shifting my thinking. And that if you look at a traditional report card, oftentimes, yes, you're seeing how they perform on skills, but what about everything else? What about every other part of the school day and what your children are doing and how they're expressing their thinking and how they're ideating and how they're interacting with their peers and how they're working through a problem and showing perseverance or evidencing empathy, etc. And so at our school, you will see that we report out on the learner profile. It's a narrative comment, of course, but it really speaks about who the child is at school and the type of qualities and attributes they are exemplifying on a daily basis, perhaps areas for growth, and it's very qualitative in that manner. But you will see that as something that we provide formal feedback on. Similarly, we provide formal feedback on each of our units of inquiry in a narrative format as well. And that's the report card is, of course, the thing that goes home. But within the classroom setting, our teachers are developing and designing learning experiences that like specifically target, let's say, communication skills or social self-management skills or social skills, and they're letting the students know that these are the types of skills we're developing and these are why they're important and this is a way that you're going to be given feedback. And so it's not just the content, but the skills are right there alongside it. And so we have
Right.
skills that are more traditional, that are subject specific, like math skills, language skills, etc. And then we also have, we call them approaches to learning. I know there's so much jargon, but approaches to learning are these skills that are not subject specific. They're not bound by discipline, but we believe that they are
Mhm.
critical to the development of a successful learner. And they are explicitly and intentionally taught. And there are communication skills, research skills, self management skills, social skills, and those are developed from our 3 year olds all the way up. So we give formal feedback, and it formalizes even more in the middle school. In MYP, they have a very formal process of how they give feedback on the approaches to learning, and they're linked to each of their projects so that kids are getting feedback on how they do in terms of the content, but also the skills and how they've evidenced those. And in terms of the question about the
But
improvement,
then
oh, sorry, Miley.
oh, no, to also answer that on the flip side too, is that we do, like, beginning in 3rd grade, standardized testing,
Mhm,
to really understand the growth and development of a student and
mhm,
how we,
yeah.
benchmark and compare in terms of,
Mhm.
English standards, math standards. That's also something that we do too, because
Yes.
that is equally important to us in terms of the
Mhm.
high academic expectations that we have for our students, but it's also balanced with how exactly everything that Jacqueline just talked about, but it's also how they are learning and how they're engaging in that learning. That's also very important too. So, and I'm sorry I interrupted you, so you can continue
That's
on.
okay. Yeah. So in terms of teachers, in order to be an accredited IB World School, which we are, all of our teachers have to attend training directly through the IB. And then the school has to have a dedicated PYP coordinator, who's myself, who works very closely with all of our teachers in sort of providing ongoing training and feedback. We have a very generous professional development package that sends our teachers, well, pre COVID-19, sends our teachers all around the world. So our teachers have been trained in Belgium and Singapore, mainland China, Germany, Canada, Mexico. And we do this very intentionally because we want them to be working with international school educators from across the globe to kind of share ideas, best practice. We want them to be trained by um, professionals working in different contexts as well. And so they bring that back, and it's a continually reflective process. To be a good IB teacher, you have to see yourself as a lifelong learner. It's not just our students. We ourselves have to embody the learner profile, and reflection is a massive part of what we do. We meet weekly and we reflect on what's working, where we have room for growth, how the students are responding. So it's a natural, organic process in that way. But I'm there to guide and support that. And therefore, yes, teachers are given formal feedback in terms of how it's working in the classroom and how they could use support. So it's not just myself that works very closely. We have quite a robust teacher mentorship program. So I very much mentor and support the teachers when it comes to everything regarding the IB. But in addition to that, we have a academic dean that is responsible for the academic program for each language. So we have a French academic dean, a Chinese academic
Mhm.
dean, an English academic dean, and we'll have a German academic dean who know the curriculum inside and out and work very closely with the language teachers to make sure the content and skills developed for each language program are simultaneously being taught. So it's through a process of mentorship and feedback.
So I'm looking at Ying's, like, I guess her questions were connected. And so as you were talking, I was trying to reread them. And Ying, by all means, please don't hesitate to also just email me and we can hop on a call together just in case we're not answering it. Um, um, I guess to your satisfaction. Oh no, I hope
Sorry.
everyone's okay. But so let me try and
Husband.
connect these two. So how the student's engagement of inquiry-based learning is evaluated, so individually, and how the improvement of the teaching is then connected, I think is what I'm reading here, and how like it evolves. And so perhaps it's like how the teacher
Are responding to
is
kids.
able to pivot,
Mhm,
yeah, responding to the kids and responding
mhm,
and pivoting as needed.
yeah,
That's something that
mhm.
I really feel the teachers do well, but it'd be great if you could talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of that really is through this process of meeting collaboratively and sharing best practice, and then the fact that we have that mentorship program. Um, but our teachers buy into the philosophy, right? They believe in this idea of co-constructing knowledge. They believe in this idea that students are bringing ideas that are like relevant and significant and worthy of our time and our attention and us listening to. And so it's a process of being we talk a lot about mindfulness as well. Like we have wellness built into our school day, and so we've had a lot of really neat conversations about how in the moment are we as teachers, like are we able to put everything else aside and really be there to observe and to notice what are our students doing, how are they responding to this. And that's where it's kind of beautiful because we do have a level of flexibility. There are certain things that are a little bit more inflexible, but we always encourage our teachers to say, like, if you've started a task or a project and it's going horribly wrong, or the children are not involved, or they already have a huge amount of information and understanding on this topic, let's come back to the drawing board and think about it. Don't just continue with your lessons. I actually really discourage teachers to have all of their plans perfectly written in pen. Like, let's write in pencil and let's respond to the students and see where we should go next. If that math concept has been mastered and they're evidencing it beautifully, don't make them do 30 more math problems, right? A little practice and repetition
Yep.
helps. Well, let's challenge them further or let's support them where they're at.
Yep.
So that's our approach.
Right. Right, right. And what we didn't touch upon is that actually across a grade level, all of the teachers are collaborating and connecting together in planning these units. And so
Mhm.
your
Yeah.
English teacher, your French teacher, your Chinese teacher, and soon to be like your German teachers will be collaborating, connecting. And so they are doing the same unit, but in each individual classroom, even let's say it's like two Chinese classrooms or two French classrooms, the way that they are approaching it could be slightly different because of the learners that they have in that class. And
Absolutely.
so, it's exactly to what she's saying, that there's allowances for them to understand who their learners are in their class,
Mhm.
but then also to explore what they're like the bee colony, right? So,
Yeah.
well, thank you very, very much. I have thoroughly enjoyed. I always enjoy my time with Jacqueline, but I've thoroughly enjoyed sharing our school, with you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me to admissions. Send me an email. We have many, many more, information sessions for you to learn a little bit more about our school. We're trying to find creative ways to actually show you guys the school without bringing you on
Yes.
campus because, COVID has just kind of thrown a wrench in all of that. But thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for
Thank you.
staying tuned. Thank you to Jacqueline for taking time. I hope your eye feels better. We'll connect on that later.
Have a good day.
But thank you so much. Everybody have a wonderful evening and thank you.